All religions are based on abstinence rather than indulgence. And all religions, therefore, have to be based on fear. Well, we don't feel that fear is necessary to base a religion on. What we've done is just reverse the procedure. Instead of trying to free ourselves, we've taken all these hang-ups, we've turned them into useful situations. If you're going to be a sinner, be the best sinner on the block. If you're going to do something that's naughty, do it. And realize that you're doing something naughty and enjoy it.
So the other day, I did something that honestly my mom probably wouldn't be too proud of me for. I went onto Amazon and I picked up the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. So I did not buy this Bible because I'm interested in converting to Satanism or anything like that. I'm a Christian. I believe very strongly that the God of the Bible and the God of Christianity is the true God, and that Christianity ultimately is truth. The reason I picked up this book was because I was online researching some things about Satanism. I was curious as to what their beliefs really were. And I came across an excerpt from the book. And this excerpt happens to be right in the beginning of the book. And essentially what this excerpt is it's a little story or anecdote that Anton LaVey tells from his early life. And this little story really caught my attention because it brings up an argument or an issue that seems to always come up when people levy complaints or arguments against Christianity. It's the complaint that Christians are hypocrites, essentially. And so typically the argument will go, well, I don't want to believe in Christianity. I want nothing to do with Christianity because all Christians are hypocrites. And this little anecdote at the beginning of the Satanic Bible essentially lays that idea out. And that intrigued me because honestly, that complaint of hypocrisy that people have against Christianity, that to me is one of the more compelling arguments as to why someone would not want to come to faith. It's not that it's an argument against the existence of God necessarily. You know, no one likes a hypocrite. So if you believe that all Christians are hypocrites or that a vast majority of Christians are hypocrites, you know, I can understand why you would not want to join Christianity. So really, it was that little excerpt from the beginning of the book that I saw online that made me want to buy this book and read it, because I thought maybe he will expound upon this idea of not wanting to be a Christian because of hypocrisy, or maybe he'll expound upon some more problems that he sees with Christianity. And that could be maybe helpful to me to understand what some complaints or what some arguments might be against Christianity so that I can better defend my faith ultimately. So I am going to read you the excerpt that initially caught my attention from this book. But first, I think I need to lay out some clarifications, or I need to make some points very clear here toward the beginning, right? So yes, this is a very sinister looking book. I mean, it has the pentagram here. It's the Satanic Bible. On the back, we have Anton LaVey, who looks like the devil himself. You know, there might be the temptation to think that this Satanic Bible is somehow a cursed item. People might be even afraid to grab a hold of this and to just pick it up because they might be thinking, oh, it's some cursed item. It's some satanic thing that if I touch it, you know, some spirit will be attached to me. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think there's any reason to believe that. You know, this is a book. It's a paperback book. It's made out of, you know, cardstock cardboard for the cover and paper and ink. It's just a book. This might strike some people the wrong way, or it might seem controversial, but I don't think it really is. It's just a book the same way that the Bible is just a book, right? What I mean by the Bible just being a book is that the Bible that you hold in your hand is paper and leather most often, or paper and cardstock for the cover, right? It's paper and ink. The powerful thing about the Bible is what's inside the Bible, is the written language inside the Bible, right? It's the communication that happens through the Bible, right? It's not the paper, it's not the ink, it's not the leather, it's the communication that happens through the Bible. The same, I think, goes for this. I'm not comparing this to the Bible saying that, you know, this has nearly the depth of ideas that the Bible has. This was written by a fallible man, and I think there's many ill-conceived things about this book. But in the same way, this isn't a cursed item. The power does not lie in the paper or the ink. The power lies in the ideas inside of it. And the ideas are ill-conceived. The ideas are evil. I can attest to that. I read the whole thing cover to cover. But I want to get rid of the misconception that this is somehow a cursed item that's going to haunt you if you have it. And that brings me to my second point. I'm not at all condoning the reading of this book for all Christians. I don't think it's helpful. I thought it might be helpful. I thought it might be interesting. In the end, you know, I kind of came up thinking it was kind of a wash. I don't know if I really learned anything. You know, I'm kind of glad that maybe I have a better understanding of what a Satanist might believe and what arguments they might levy against Christianity. But in the end, I don't know that it profited me that much. So I'm not at all suggesting that Christians necessarily read this. And in fact, I would urge you not to read it, especially if you're the type of person who is easily persuaded by emotional argumentation. This book, I think, fails in a lot of logical argumentation. But Anton LaVey, I have to give him credit where credit's due. He is a good writer, and he makes some very compelling emotional arguments that, like I said, I don't think those arguments hold up logically, but I do think emotionally, if you're swayed easily like that, they could be detrimental and confusing to you and maybe harm you a little bit. And the third thing I think that we need to maybe establish right off the bat is I think there's maybe some misunderstanding as to Anton LaVey's particular brand of Satanism. So the particular brand of Satanism that Anton LaVey puts forth in this book actually does not believe in Satan, does not believe in God, does not believe in heaven, does not believe in hell. He does not believe in the spiritual realm. Essentially, the beliefs of Anton LaVey would align very well with an atheistic humanistic view, like an atheistic humanism. Essentially, he believes that all that really exists is the here and now, is our existence on earth, and there's nothing beyond it necessarily. And so I think that's maybe a misconception that we need to get out of the way before we discuss this book too, is that though he does delve into some like rituals and some almost incantations or satanic prayers in the Satanic Bible, he terms those fantasy. He says there's both truth and fantasy in this book, and that is what he terms fantasy. He doesn't believe that you're necessarily making contact with anything spiritual, but he believes that the idea of religious fantasy or religious ceremony can bring a person into an emotional state where they will better believe and better be able to achieve the goals that they're trying to bring forth. So I think that's a major misconception that we maybe need to get out of the way, is that Anton LaVey's particular brand of Satanism is not necessarily worshiping the devil, Satan himself. They're worshiping humans. They're worshiping the human self, which is equally wicked. Right? The Bible speaks a lot about the worship of self and making self an idol and how wicked and evil and sinful that is. Essentially, the formulation that I'm going to go through as I talk about the Satanic Bible is I'm going to put forth 3 arguments as to why I think the Satanic Bible fails at being compelling as a religious text, or fails at presenting itself as a viable religion. So now I'm going to read you the little excerpt that caught my attention, that made me initially buy this book and read it. And I want you to keep in mind what I said about emotionally compelling arguments, right? He will make a lot of emotionally compelling arguments, and the excerpt from the beginning of this book is an emotionally compelling thought or argument. I don't think LaVey himself would term this an argument in the beginning of the book, but I think he uses this excerpt as a setup for his whole book. And so I am taking it as an argument. I'm taking this whole book as an argument for why we should believe in Satanism. And ultimately, I'm going to present, like I said, 3 points to why I don't think he achieves his goal of making a compelling point for Satanism. So just keep in mind that idea. He makes emotionally compelling arguments, but we want to dig deeper than emotions and think about this logically too, and see if it holds up under logical and possibly a little bit of theological scrutiny, right? So I'm going to start out by reading this whole excerpt in the beginning. It's not very long. And we'll go from there. On Saturday night, I would see men lusting after half-naked girls dancing at the carnival. And on Sunday morning, when I was playing the organ for tent show evangelists at the other end of the carnival lot, I would see these same men sitting in the pews with their wives and their children, asking God to forgive them and purge them of carnal desires. And the next Saturday night, they'd be back at the carnival or some other place of indulgence. I knew then that the Christian church thrives on hypocrisy, and that man's carnal nature will win out. Like I said, when you first listen to that little excerpt, it seems like a very compelling point, right? I think we've all experienced in our Christian lives and in ourselves, right? I admit this about myself, that we've all witnessed hypocrisy. I have seen hypocrisy in myself. It's one of the things that I hate most. It's frustrating. It's a terrible thing. And we see it in other people, and it's very distasteful. It looks horrible on people. Hypocrisy is a horrible thing. What LaVey is doing here, I think, is he's using this story as a setup for his whole book, right? He's saying, look at the hypocrisy in the Christian church. Obviously, there's something wrong to where they cannot live out what they're preaching, right? So the point that he will try to make throughout the whole book is that life is for indulgence and not abstinence. And he will even expound upon that point later on in the book, saying that life is the ultimate indulgence and death is the ultimate abstinence. So basically his whole philosophy is that men and women should not try to suppress their natural desires and their compulsions and their lusts and their gluttonies for certain sins, but rather they should indulge in them. So this brings me to my first point, where I want to start to set up a case against Satanism. Though this little story seems like a compelling way to set up his philosophy and a compelling way to set up the Satanic Bible, I think it ultimately falls flat, because there's an idea in argumentation and in logic that's called an ad hominem argument. It's a logical fallacy. Literally what the words ad hominem mean is an argument against the man. And what this means is that you look at someone's argument for something, and instead of trying to dismantle their argument, you dismantle the person. You point out some character flaw in the person that would attempt to discredit that person instead of discredit their argument. Now, this is termed a logical fallacy for good reason. It's termed a logical fallacy because though an emotional argument like that, an attack against, let's say we're in a debate, an attack against one debater's character might seem compelling to the audience, it's doing nothing to prove anything against the man's argument. It's just trying to discredit the man himself. And that is not ethical in argumentation or a debate. Argumentation and debate is focused on pitting ideas against each other, not people. So to set up his book like this is essentially to say Christianity and the God of Christianity must be false because the people who practice Christianity are hypocrites. It's an ad hominem attack against the people of Christianity and not Christianity itself, which, like I said, is very compelling to an audience, and that's the danger of an ad hominem argument, right? So Satanism is founded on a very unstable or shaky foundation, right? The very beginning of the Satanist holy book or the Satanist Bible starts out its argumentation, even though I'm aware that this is not necessarily a book of argumentation. It starts out its argument for Satanism, saying that Christianity can't be true because its people are hypocrites. Well, as we've just seen, that's an ad hominem attack, and that's a logical fallacy. And so right off the bat, we start with some shaky evidence, if you will. So the second point that I want to make to substantiate my claim that Satanism is based on a shaky foundation or is built on a shaky and unstable foundation is this. So the second point comes directly from the Satanic Bible, in the introduction of the Satanic Bible written by a man named Peter Gilmore. And Peter Gilmore, at least at the time of this particular book, was the high priest of the Satanic Church. So he seemingly should know what he's talking about. Gilmore writes, "Unlike the founders of other religions who claimed exalted inspiration delivered through some supernatural entity, LaVey readily acknowledged that he used his own faculties to synthesize Satanism." I hope this is maybe evident to those watching as to why this would be a potential problem, right? So the issue that this brings up is that all the ideas that contained in this book are synthesized in the mind of a fallible human, namely Anton LaVey. The whole religion comes from this one man's mind and this one man's imagination of how the world should work. And so that puts Satanism on rather shaky ground. This is one person's opinion. It's basically an opinion piece. Though we can certainly give credence to one individual's idea, it makes it a lot easier to discredit it if we find flaws in it. If we find logical flaws and issues with the text, it's very easy to say, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense because this was one person's take on the world. And so, yes, he would have a certain perspective with which he viewed the world. And if we find logical fallacies in it, you know, it just discredits the work. Like it's no big deal. At this point, it's a work of fiction or fantasy, which ironically is what this book is termed in literary classification. It's termed fantasy, which I think it's a lot more sinister than fantasy. But the fact that this book comes from one man's imagination makes it very discountable when we start to perceive logical fallacies and contradictions in the book. You know, it's very easy to just discount it and be like, yeah, I guess this is one guy's take on the world, but it's not very substantial. It doesn't seem to hold up. And when you get past the emotionally compelling arguments, that's kind of what you're left thinking, is that, well, that was interesting, but, you know, I don't really agree with that. Whereas for a religion like Christianity, you have thousands upon thousands of years of testimony and prophecy and written work and theology and ideas that have gone into that. And that is a lot harder to discount. You have 40 distinct authors of the Bible that all seem to make a coherent narrative. You have 4 gospel writers who all seem to say the same account about Jesus and his life on the earth. So the Christian Bible is very hard to discount, I think, because there are a lot of things within it that can be historically proven. There are a lot of things within it that are based on the testimony of eyewitnesses, supposedly. There's a lot of philosophy and theology that has developed over those thousands of years in that religion. And so Christianity is much, much, much harder to discount than something like this that came from the ideas of one man in his lifetime. The third point that I would like to make to bolster my claim that Satanism is ultimately built on a shaky foundation is that LaVey seems to assume that other religions, especially Christianity, and he mentions some Eastern religions, that other religions are built on falsehood. And he makes the claim that in essence all other religions are just like his and that they came from the minds of men, and men make up gods in their own image essentially. And so he discounts every other religion, and especially Christianity. Christianity, I would say, takes the brunt of his anger or his frustration, I would say. So he makes the assumption that Christianity and other religions are false. And you might wonder, well, what's the problem with that? The issue in the Satanic Bible is that LaVey never substantiates those claims, right? He never backs those claims up with anything. He never argues for the non-existence of God. He never argues for why the Christian moral system would be incorrect. He doesn't argue anything beyond the anecdotal argument of all Christians are hypocrites. He simply assumes that Christianity and all the other religions are false, while assuming that his is the most correct. And I think that's a really dangerous assumption. And here's a couple passages from the Satanic Bible that kind of encapsulate his idea of Satanism being the one truthful and honest religion and all the other religions being false. And the way I'm going to reference these in the Satanic Bible is to just reference the page number. I'm not sure of any better way to do it. I don't know if all of the Satanic Bibles have the same pagination, but that's how I'm going to reference it because that's the best way I know how to do it. So on page 30, no hoary falsehood shall be a truth to me. No stifling dogma shall encramp my pen. This is page 32. Whatever alleged truth is proved by results to be but an empty fiction, let it be unceremoniously flung into the outer darkness among the dead gods, dead empires, dead philosophies, and other useless lumber and wreckage. And from page 31, he that is slow to believe anything and everything is of great understanding, for belief in one false principle is the beginning of all unwisdom. Now again, especially that last point seems reasonable, right? But the problem with all these statements is that they're all being said in the context of rejecting all other notions of religion and other notions of belief and morality and only accepting Satanism. And like I said, the problem with that is that he offers no argumentation as to why everything else would be false and Satanism would be true. And so when LaVey says in his own Satanic Bible, whatever alleged truth is proven by results to be an empty fiction, let it be unceremoniously flung into the outer darkness among the dead gods, dead empires, dead philosophies, and other useless lumber and wreckage. I think the most apt application of that passage is to lump the Satanic Bible in with that, because he's proven no falsehood on the part of Christianity. He has not proven that Christianity is a fiction. So he really has no basis to say that Satanism is the only true and honest religion and everything else is a lie, because he's made no arguments against the other religions. And so I think we start to see here a little bit of intellectual dishonesty, right? He's saying we want to base our beliefs on what's true and Satanism is true, but he never offers any arguments to say that Christianity or the other religions are false. And he really offers no compelling logical argumentation as to why Satanism would be true, at least at this point. So those are 3 points to substantiate my claim that Satanism is built on a very shaky foundation, right? So the first point is that LaVey's arguments are essentially ad hominem arguments, and they're committing logical fallacy. The second point is that all of these ideas contained in this book come from the mind of Anton LaVey himself, and only from his mind, only in his lifetime. So this makes the Satanist Bible a rather easily dismissible work, because when you start to see logical fallacies and when you start to see the logic of things breaking apart, you're like, well, okay, it's just the work of one man. Like, this does not impact anybody a whole lot. And the third point is that LaVey simply discounts all other religions or all other claims of truth without any explanation as to why he discounts them other than an ad hominem attack. He does not levy any compelling evidence against Christianity or any of the other world religions. He simply assumes them as false and assumes Satanism as self-evidently true. But as we'll see later later in this discussion of the Satanic Bible, I think not only do we see that Satanism is not self-evidently true, but I think there's many instances in which Satanism is self-evidently contradictory or self-evidently false, and it proves itself to be logically or even experientially fallacious. So this is going to be the end of a first part of maybe a 2 or 3 part series where I go into the Satanic Bible and just discuss more problems I have with it and how I think it ultimately fails as a philosophy and as a religion. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.